Today's video is going to be all about concealer. What would you use concealer for? What's the best shade to use? Are you better off using a colour corrector? How can you get it to stop creasing? All of this and more. As always, everything I've used or mentioned is listed in the description of the video, but please feel free to substitute all of these tips with whatever you already have at home. So to frame this chat, I'm going to go through some of the questions you've sent in and we can work through them to chat through all things concealer. The first thing I wanted to talk about, Angie, you had asked me if I could recommend a concealer that doesn't crease under the eyes. Can I be really honest with you? The first thing we need to address when we're talking about concealer is that all of them eventually will crease under the eyes. It's just the nature of that is a part of your face with lots of fine lines, and you know, even if you don't have fine lines, that's where a lot of your expression comes from. And so ultimately at some point in the day, product is likely to gather there. But what we can do is there's loads we can do to prevent it from happening and delay how long it takes for that to happen. The first thing I thought I'd talk through with concealer is that sometimes the gathering of product can be something as simple as that you're using a little bit too much of it. So if you are particularly looking for, you know, areas like around the eyes that you're noticing things gather a bit more easily, try and find a formula that is really densely pigmented so that a tiny bit goes a long way. And that way you've got less product on the eye area to then gather in those fine lines. The next thing I would say, and this step is kind of personal to how you like to wear your makeup, is that for eyes in particular, I would always recommend setting that in place with something. Now, when you set your concealer with something, whether it's a little dusting of powder, or if you'd prefer to not use powder, you could use a setting spray on literally a small brush like this and just press it over the concealer. What that will do is help to lock it into place and prevent it from running around once you've put it where it's going to sit. So that is always really important to kind of give you the longest wear. But ultimately, what I'm going to do now is go through a few favourites across different price points and for different purposes, because I think as well with concealer, there are so many different reasons you might be using it, and I'd advise you on different things for different criteria. So I'm just looking at a few of my notes here when it comes to choosing your shade. Another question that comes in a lot is, how do you choose the perfect shade of concealer? Should you use a shade lighter than your complexion? Should you use a perfect match? Now, these two routes will give you different results. So if you go for something a bit lighter, that's going to have more of a brightening effect on the eyes. So that can be really good if you're feeling a bit dull or tired and the concealer is to just zhuzh everything up a bit. However, if your concealer is predominantly going to be used to take attention away from something, so for example, I'm just looking here, I don't know how to, I can't pronounce your username, but it was like Shwa. Shwa, you wanted to know how to cover up acne. The last thing we want to do with something like acne, which is probably high in colour and also maybe raised in texture, anything lighter is just going to draw attention to that. So that's where I would recommend a really true to skin finish, so that you're ultimately just like camouflaging it rather than drawing attention to it. So just as a top line to give you a few ideas, there are so many great concealers on the market, but these are a few that I find that I gravitate to a lot personally, or also use a lot on clients or recommend to other people. I thought I'd go through a few that you might find helpful for traditional concealing. So one of the best, I would say, on the high street is the Maybelline Instant Eye Erase. Really lovely and creamy, but pigmented. So this is a great example of something, like I said, that you don't have to use loads of it to get your concealer done, and so it's less likely to spill. I also love that you've got a little sponge applicator there, so if you're out and about on the go, you can kind of touch up as you need to. A couple that are a bit more matte in consistency, so for covering a spot, for example, brilliant. For working around the eyes, you're going to want to prep with eye cream, just a plain going past there, sorry. Collection Lasting Perfection Concealer. You see this a lot. Well, I certainly see it a lot on TikTok and things like that, with good reason. This is a very full coverage, but I would prep your skin well first. And the L'Oreal Infallible Concealer, again, very densely pigmented, a very kind of comfortable option for you. If coverage is your main concern, you are going to achieve that with this. If you need to prep your skin, if you're concealing a particularly dry area, the CeraVe Eye Cream I would really recommend. Lovely and creamy, again a great affordable option, perfect for under your concealer. Yesterday I made a similar video to this, but all about foundation, and ultimately I tapped into my previous job as beauty personal shopper, and so I was trying to remember, like when I had my run of the beauty floor, which places I would gravitate to for different things. Because let's say, for example, I have what I have in here, but there are products that I would probably recommend all the time that I just didn't actually have in the cupboard to look at yesterday. And I was thinking one of the eye creams I used to recommend loads is the Estee Lauder Advanced Night Repair. Now, to be honest with you, Advanced Night Repair Serum, absolutely brilliant, one of the best products you can ever get. But for me, because I've been diagnosed with rosacea since then, I've really stripped back my skincare. And so there's probably loads of things like that that I don't mention because I don't personally use them now. But for someone that didn't have rosacea, absolutely go for it. And that is a lovely eye cream for, it's more of a gel texture, so it's a bit quicker, great to kind of depuff and take away any of the other kind of tiredness that you might see in your eyes before you put the concealer on. Now, speaking of yesterday's video, another thing that really came through, so just to recap, if you didn't see yesterday's video, I made this complete guide but to foundation. I'm just keeping an eye on the time today because I had to do 2 parts yesterday and I'd like to do this in one. But I said, and I'd say the same for this conversation too, if you're watching this and you want a great recommendation for something to do a certain job, please leave a comment. Tell me about your skin. Tell me what you're looking for. Are you dry, oily, combination? Are you looking to cover pigmentation? Is it to cover redness? Do you just want something nice and fresh? So I would invite you to do exactly the same for this video. If I can help you to find your perfect concealer, leave a comment, tell me all of this. I don't read my DMs, but I always read the comments. So if you ever want a recommendation for anything, please feel free to ask. And if I've missed anything in a DM, feel free to comment and I'll pick it up that way. But when I was reading the responses, which by the way, I'm going to come back to this evening, loads of people wrote back and said, I've got redness at the end of my nose. Obviously, that's probably because on this page I speak about rosacea a lot, but there are different concealers I would recommend for different purposes. And the Nars Soft Matte Concealer is one of my main recommendations if you have redness, in particular from rosacea at the end of your nose, because what I like about this is even though it's a cream consistency, it dries to a matte finish, so you get this lovely coverage. It doesn't have any kind of luminosity or sheen, which, to be honest, on the end of your nose, that's an area that tends to need a bit of powdering anyway, so it's great that it's more velvety. But that is a great one. Look at the little size of it to have in your bag and just touch up as you go along. Now, as soon as I've said that, I would also say that lots of people that experience redness at the end of their nose or rosacea or, you know, things like that may also experience a lot of dryness. If you wanted something equally as compact but slightly creamier, the Bobbi Brown concealer sticks are lovely. And again, you can just touch up where you need, super, super small. That would fit in your pocket, never mind your bag. Because again, with concealer in particular, if it's for something like redness or a problem area, a combination skin, the truth is you can do your best before you leave the house to set everything in a way that it will last the day, but it will last that bit better if you just top it up as you go along. In particular, if it's something that's hot to the touch or uncomfortable or irritated, you will achieve more of a flawless finish by just topping up as you go. And I think that's another myth. We have this myth that because products have this amount of wear, that amount of wear, X hours of wear, and I'm sure they do deliver that because they can't claim that unless they've got a test to back it up. So it is the case that it will wear for that length of time, but will it look as perfect as when you first put it on? No. And the way to keep it looking perfect is just to top up as you go. A couple of other concealers I wanted to mention. New and lovely Charlotte Tilbury's Beautiful Skin Concealer. This is a nice one for just kind of creaminess, radiance, adding a bit of luminosity. The Nars Radiant Creamy, I've just used all the same words for this. This is a real classic that I would recommend wholeheartedly. Always in my kit. This sits really well on everyone. It's coverage, but it's creamy. It's not drying. A great one if you're like, I've never found the right concealer. This could be the one. I'm always really conscious that I never want you to feel like I'm just always hard selling the IT Cosmetics. I am their brand ambassador. I love them. But the reality is, and it's the same for some of the other things I'm going to show you, like if I've worked with someone, it's because I love the product. And so like for me, my personal concealer is the IT Cosmetics Bye Bye Under Eye. Bye Bye Under Eye is so densely pigmented. I would also argue it's one of the most misunderstood products because it's so pigmented that you need a tiny bit. And if you use any more than a tiny bit, it's going to be too much and it might feel uncomfortable. But if you have, this will cover even like tattoos. If you have any discoloration or high colour and you want something that will completely cover it and last for the day, this would be my #1 recommendation for you. Another thing I would say is that because you only need a tiny bit, a tube will last you a really long time. This is also one, it reminds me actually, one of the things I said yesterday in the foundation video is that it's really important to have a look at with your brand, what are they suggesting that you do to apply it? Do they recommend using the hands? Do they recommend using a brush or a sponge? Because for example, Bye Bye Under Eye is best used if you warm it up a little bit first and then put it on. So I wouldn't recommend using this with your hands because I'm not sure that a patting motion is going to be enough to melt this down as much as it can melt. So I'd always use a little brush with this, or at the very least, warm it right down on the back of your hand and then press it in that way. I'm looking at the time. This is going to be a 2-parter, isn't it? So I'm not going to put too much pressure on myself now to go quickly, even though I already have been going quickly. I've nearly reached my Instagram cut-off point, so I'm going to close this video here. I've got loads of questions that I still need to answer, including how to cover dark circles, how to cover a spot, pinpoint concealing, what do you do when your under eye concealer has creased, and then I'm also going to touch on when it's worth using a colour corrector rather than a concealer. So hopefully I will see you back here. I'm going to make a part 2 and I'll cover all of that and more in the next video.